Have you ever sat quietly in a familiar room, surrounded by objects that have been part of your life for decades, and suddenly felt a soft ache rise within you, whispering a simple question? When did things between me and my child become so distant? You spent your youth caring, sacrificing, and loving, from countless sleepless nights when they were small to the many years spent worrying as they grew older. You were the one they turned to after every fall, the shoulder that never turned away a single tear. And yet now, when you speak, your words are cut off. When you offer advice, their eyes look away. When you ask for help, a rejection arrives before any offer of care. And perhaps the deepest pain isn't the rejection itself, but the quiet, lingering feeling that somehow you've become invisible. If that touches something tender in your chest, please know this: you are not alone. Many parents at a certain point in life begin to sense this silent shift. A role once central to the family slowly fades. From being the one everyone turned to, you've become the one mentioned last, if at all. But that feeling, it's not weakness. It's the quiet voice of a heart that has loved deeply, given without conditions, and now longs simply to be understood. Before we gently explore this journey of healing together, if you feel seen by these words, I invite you to subscribe to Advice for Seniors, a place where we share gentle, human, and heartfelt messages for those entering the later chapters of life with dignity and quiet strength. Your presence here is our greatest encouragement to continue walking beside you, listening and lifting one another day by day. Today we'll walk through these thoughts, not to blame, not to dwell in sadness, but to rediscover something truly essential: your worth, the respect you still deserve, and a new way of living, gentler, stronger, and no longer needing to strain for recognition. 1. When kindness goes too far. Have you ever said yes when your heart longed to say no? You agreed to watch the grandkids even when you were utterly exhausted. You cleaned the house for hours just so it wouldn't look messy when they stopped by. You stayed silent when your child spoke with sharpness, just to avoid making a scene. You canceled your plans, declined your own needs, just to be there when they wanted, not even when they truly needed you. Many parents do this, not because they are weak, but because they love. Because they believe that sacrifice preserves the relationship. Because they hope that patience will lead to understanding. But my dear friend, that isn't always true. Deep down, we humans tend to respect what stands firm, not what constantly yields. Not because we are cruel, but because what is too easily given is often taken for granted. I once knew a woman named Margaret. She raised 3 children with all the love and strength she had. But in her later years, she began stepping back, no longer offering her opinions when it came to family decisions. She stayed quiet about renovations, about how her retirement savings were spent. As long as the family's at peace, she would say. But the more she stepped back, the less her children listened. The more she gave, the more she was left behind in the life she had helped build. You see, kindness without self-respect doesn't lead to understanding. It leads to being overlooked. Not because your children are unkind, but because you've unintentionally taught them that your boundaries are blurry, that your voice, your time, and your feelings can be set aside. And so, one day, you may find yourself still loving, still giving, but no longer receiving the respect that once came naturally. So please remember this, gently but firmly. You have the right to say no. You have the right to hold space for your own needs. You don't have to do everything just to be loved. You are allowed to preserve your energy, your peace, and your dignity. Because respect doesn't come from giving everything. It comes from knowing what is most precious and choosing, bravely, to keep a part of that for yourself. 2. Strength doesn't lie in raising your voice. When someone, especially your own child, speaks to you disrespectfully, dismisses your advice, or acts like your presence no longer matters, the first feeling is painfully real: anger, hurt, and even sorrow. You want to respond, to remind them, I've sacrificed so much for you, to shout, how dare you speak to me that way? Or maybe you stay silent, swallowing the words but carrying a deep, unspoken ache. All of those reactions are human. They are real. But here's something worth remembering. Anger rarely brings back respect. More often, it just widens the distance. Because when you lose your temper, you're unintentionally showing that the other person, even your child, still has power over your emotions. So what's stronger than shouting? It's something quieter, steadier. It's calm dignity. I think of Frank, a retired school teacher. For decades, his students loved and respected him. But at home, his own children treated him like just an old man with outdated ideas. They spoke curtly, sometimes even mocked his thoughts. At first, Frank pushed back. He argued. He tried to reclaim his place in the family by speaking louder, explaining more. But the more he tried, the more they tuned him out. Until one day he chose a different path. He stopped arguing. He stopped preaching. He still spoke, but softly, slowly, with intention. Not to persuade, but to express. He no longer chased validation. Instead, he stood in quiet self-respect. And strangely enough, the more grounded he became, the more his children began to listen. Not because his words changed, but because his presence did. He was no longer trying to prove his worth. He was embodying it, like an old tree that no longer needs to stretch upward because its roots are already planted deep, unshakable. You don't have to win back your worth through debate. You only need to live from that worth, with steadiness, with grace, with quiet certainty. Because real power doesn't shout, it stands still. And in that stillness, others begin to see you differently. 3. When your happiness no longer depends on their phone call, there's a truth many older parents quietly carry: the sting of a silent phone, a holiday without an invitation, the loving messages that come less and less often. We tell ourselves they're busy, and that may be true, but it doesn't stop the quiet ache inside. You love your children, no question there. But the more we love, the more we hope. And when that hope goes unmet, it's easy for your emotions to rise and fall with theirs. They're cheerful today, you're lifted. They're distracted tomorrow, you're deflated. But here's a gentle truth that might just set you free. You don't need your children to define your worth. It's not fair to them, and it's not fair to you. True happiness doesn't come from phone calls, gifts, or perfectly timed messages. It comes from within, when you learn to fill your own cup without needing someone else to pour into it. I remember a woman named Helen. She had devoted her entire life to her children. When they grew up and moved away, it was as if she fell into a void. Every morning she'd wait for a message. Every mealtime, she'd replay the sounds of laughter around the old dining table. And day after day she waited, only to feel forgotten. Until one day Helen asked herself, what if I stopped waiting? What would life look like then? She started stepping out, joined a dance class, had lunch with old friends, picked up a book she'd left unfinished years ago, painted her first picture in decades. And then she laughed. Not because someone made her laugh, but because she allowed herself to feel alive again. And something unexpected happened. Her children started calling more. Not out of guilt, but out of genuine longing. Because now their mother wasn't a quiet figure sitting by the phone. She was vibrant, full of life, with her own joy and her own light. You see, you don't have to demand your children's presence. You only need to be fully present with yourself. When you are, others naturally come back to you, not out of duty, but from the heart. Because people are drawn not to neediness, but to wholeness. And your wholeness begins the moment you choose to live for you. 4. Boundaries are love, not distance. When people hear the word boundaries, they often think of something rigid, distant, or even cold. But the truth is, when set with care, boundaries don't create distance. They create clarity. They help others understand the limits of love and respect. In family life, especially with adult children, boundaries become even more important. Not because you want to control, but because you're quietly teaching them how to treat you as someone with worth and dignity. I once knew a man named Robert. In his career, he was highly respected, a businessman who led teams and earned admiration. But in his own home, he was often interrupted, talked over, dismissed as old-fashioned. At first, Robert brushed it off. They're busy. They're under stress, he told himself. So he stayed quiet. Let things go. But the more he stayed silent, the less he was respected. Then one evening, during dinner, one of his sons cut him off sharply mid-sentence. Robert didn't get angry. He waited for the moment to settle, then calmly said, "I don't need you to agree with everything I say, but I do expect to be spoken to with respect. If that's not possible, I'll excuse myself from the conversation." No scolding, no drama, just a clear line. And somehow that one sentence changed things. From then on, the conversations became more thoughtful, more balanced. Not because Robert forced them to change, but because he set a standard for how he deserved to be treated. You see, sometimes we stay silent thinking it's an act of love, but love without boundaries often turns into quiet resentment. On the other hand, when you love yourself enough to gently say, "This is not okay with me," others begin to truly see you. And here's the beautiful part. Clear boundaries don't drive people away. They make relationships cleaner, deeper, more sincere. Your children won't love you less for setting them. They'll begin to value your presence more because it's no longer a given. It's a choice you make, and that choice has meaning. 5. When kindness becomes an expectation, deep in every parent's heart is a quiet joy, the joy of giving. Helping your children, even in small ways, brings a warmth no words can fully describe. A bit of money when they're in a tough spot, watching the grandkids on short notice, cooking a warm meal. You didn't do it for thanks, just knowing they're okay. That was always enough. But have you noticed? The more you give, the fewer thank yous come your way. And sometimes your help doesn't feel appreciated. It just feels expected. Maybe you once canceled your own doctor's appointment to babysit. Maybe you handed over money without being asked twice. Maybe you were always the first one they called, and the last one they remembered to thank. And then one day, you needed something. A little help, a minor procedure, a simple request, but no one came. Everyone was too busy, as if you'd never been there all those other times. That feeling, it's not anger, it's a quiet awakening. I remember George, a father who was always there, helping with moves, fixing plumbing, loaning money. Even in his 70s, he was the go-to problem solver. But when he went into the hospital for a minor surgery, none of his 3 children showed up. He didn't complain. He just thought deeply. And then he did something different. He started saying no, not harshly, just gently. "I already have plans that day." Or, "I can help, but only if you prepare things ahead of time for me." At first, his kids were surprised, even annoyed. But gradually, something shifted. The thank yous returned. They began asking instead of assuming, because now his help wasn't automatic. It was a gift. And people value what doesn't come from silent sacrifice. You don't have to stop loving. You don't have to stop giving, but sometimes you need to step back just a little so others can feel the absence of your help. And learn how to appreciate your presence again, because kindness without limits doesn't make people better. It only makes the giver fade, quietly, painfully, within their own home. When you live true to yourself, respect finds its way back. You've spent years, maybe decades, caring, sacrificing, protecting. You've grown used to stepping back, letting others go first. And maybe at one point, you said to yourself, "When the kids are settled, I'll finally live for me." Now they've grown. They have lives of their own. And you might be wondering, but what about me? Here's something rarely spoken but deeply important. You are not just a parent, you are a person with dreams, hobbies, feelings, and a life that's still unfolding. One of the most powerful gifts you can give, not just to yourself but to your children, is a full, vibrant life. A life that doesn't revolve around their schedules or their calls, but a life that inspires them simply by being whole. I once met an older woman, living alone. She never complained. She rose early, drank tea, read books, took walks, went to plays by herself. She had a small garden, a few close friends, and a sparkle in her eyes. When I asked her the secret to joyful aging, she smiled and said, "I don't wait for my children to come home to start living. I live so that when they do come, they find me fully alive." You don't need daily calls to feel worthy. You don't need family vacations to feel loved. You just need to wake up each day and choose one thing, just one, that brings you joy. Maybe it's a class you've always wanted to take, a trip you've postponed, a book you never finished, a coffee date with an old friend. These small acts say, "I am living, not just existing." And when you live in alignment with your true self, your children will see you differently. Not as the parent waiting for a phone call, but as a person, confident, whole, and quietly radiant. They will respect you, not out of duty, but admiration. True love doesn't come from silent sacrifice. It comes from steady presence, rooted in self-respect and quiet grace. If you've read this far, please remember this. You deserve respect, not for what you've given in the past, but for who you are right now, whole, strong, and deeply enough. So live, don't wait. Step forward, don't stand by, and let your inner light be the reason they come home. Not because they need something, but because you have become someone they want to return to.